You've probably seen it countless times, but have you ever really stopped to think about what it all means? Today we're digging into the hijab, and I think you'll find the meaning woven into its fabric is way more complex and honestly way more fascinating than you might think.
So let's just be honest for a second. When you see a woman wearing a hijab, what do you see? What's that first immediate thought that pops into your head? Are there any assumptions that come along with it?
It feels like the whole conversation gets split right down the middle, doesn't it? On one hand, you hear it's a symbol of oppression. But on the other, you hear it's a profound statement of empowerment. So, which is it? That's the big question we're going to tackle.
All right, so to really get to the bottom of this, we've got to look past the piece of cloth itself. And we're going to start with the actual word, hijab.
So the word hijab itself, it's our first big clue. In Arabic, it literally translates to a barrier, or a curtain, or a screen. Right away, that tells you this concept was never just about a headscarf. It's about something much bigger. Ideas like privacy and modesty, a kind of separation.
And that barrier we're talking about, it's not just a physical thing. It's more like a whole ethical framework. It's something that's meant to guide how you act, how you interact with other people, and even how you think about your own spiritual life. It goes way deeper than just fabric.
Okay, but if it's this whole big framework, where does it come from? Who says? Well, for a lot of people, the answer isn't about culture. It's about faith.
So let's trace this back. The sources point right to the Quran. Now, head coverings weren't exactly a new idea in that part of the world, but the Quran really codified it. It set it up as a divine instruction for modesty, and hey, this part is important, for both men and women. For women, the specific guideline was to wrap their head covers over their chests. So it's framed as this very personal act of worship. It's between you and God, not you and your culture.
So when you see it as a direct message from God, the decision to wear it obviously isn't something you just do on a whim. And look, we have to be real here. For some women around the world, this choice is not freely made. That is a reality. But for so many others, and this is the focus here, it is a deeply personal, conscious choice. It's something they've researched, thought about, reflected on, and they absolutely own that decision.
And that word, choice, that brings us to maybe the most controversial part of this whole discussion, the relationship between the hijab and freedom.
All right, let's just get the elephant in the room out of the way. In many Western societies, the hijab is almost immediately associated with, well, extremism and oppression, right? That connection is super powerful in the media, and you see it everywhere. It's a huge part of the public perception.
And here's where things get really interesting. Think about this double standard for a second. When you see a Christian nun's veil, what do you think? Sincere religious devotion, right? But then a Muslim woman's hijab. Suddenly it's viewed with suspicion, like it's some kind of political statement. It's a great question to ask yourself. Why do we see two very similar acts of faith in two completely different ways?
So what about the women who actually wear it? How do they feel about this idea that it's restrictive? Well, one woman put it perfectly. I can do everything and anything while I am putting my hijab on. I mean, that's a pretty powerful statement that just flies in the face of that whole limitation narrative.
And she's not alone, not by a long shot. This is just reality. Women who wear the hijab are doctors, they're teachers, they're engineers, they're artists. They are out there in every single field contributing to society. For them, the hijab isn't a barrier to their success. It's just a part of who they are.
Okay, so if this whole story about oppression just doesn't line up with the reality for so many women, what are we missing? What's the other side of the coin? This is where we need to shift our perspective a little bit.
What if we've been thinking about freedom all wrong? From this viewpoint, real liberation isn't about uncovering yourself, it's about control. It's about you deciding how your body is seen by the world. It's basically an invitation that says, hey, judge me for my mind, for my character, for who I am, not for how I look. And when you think about it, that's a way to liberate yourself from the crazy, objectifying beauty standards society throws at us 24/7.
And this all leads to a really powerful final point. For so many of these women, the biggest struggle isn't the piece of cloth they wear. Not at all. The real barrier, the true challenge, is the prejudice they face from a world that just doesn't understand the depth of their choice.
So that leaves us with one last thing to think about. We tend to have this very specific, very fixed picture of what liberation is supposed to look like. But is it really one size fits all? What if real freedom, true freedom, is simply having the power to define that journey for yourself?